Big thanks to Into the AM for helping support my channel. Use my coupon code RISTER at checkout or use any of my affiliate links and get an additional 10% off of any order. Thanks again to Into the AM for helping to support my channel. Tomorrow, Delta 8 will be going down in Japan, one of two majors happening this weekend, part of the country's Golden Week that will see some of the best, most important tournaments of the entire summer. But it hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows. You see, as the seeding for this tournament was released and people took a look at it for the first time, many people noticed something that they found very objectionable. Many people, on Twitter especially, are saying that Delta 8's seeding is intentionally rigged to sabotage the brackets of North American players. Today we'll be investigating these allegations, much like we did when we looked at Terra's seeding controversy. A video that will end up being shockingly similar to this video. We're going to look at the complaints, and then I actually managed to ask some of the questions to one of the people responsible for this seeding, so we'll actually be able to hear their side of the argument. By the end of this video, you'll be able to decide for yourself whether or not this seeding is rigged against NA players. But for today, let's just get right into it. The majority of people's complaints aren't around the seeding numbers per se, but rather the bracket paths of a few specific players. But first of all, let me go over exactly how this tournament was seeded, because a lot of people don't even know how this ended up happening, which is leading to some gross misconceptions being spread around. This is the seeding graphic, courtesy of DarkNutStat. Pause to take a look at it if you'd like. But this seeding, right here, was not done by Japan. Instead, for Delta 8, the Japanese TOs outsourced the seeding of this tournament. To who, you may ask? The Ultimate Stats Discord, which used to be the PG Stats Discord, and contains everyone who worked diligently on that team before Panda shut down. In other words, this tournament was done by North American stats people. This is the first misconception that I'm clearing up in this video. A lot of people on Twitter have tried to forward the narrative that Japan is sabotaging North American players and their brackets, in order for more Japanese players to do well and have a boosted performance. And even though the stats people I talked to did tell me that the Japanese TOs had the final say, as far as I understand, the seeding is unchanged from how the Ultimate Stats team submitted it. And allow me to be very clear here. Even if this seeding ends up being rigged to sabotage certain players, it is not Japan or a Japanese TO's doing. It would actually be a case of friendly fire from North American stats people. Immediately, this puts a hole in the "it's rigged" argument, because it completely removes one of the main narratives that the "it's rigged" crowd has been pushing. The idea that Japan's TOs don't want a North American player to win. But how did the North American stats team seed this? For future reference, it isn't just one person seeding these tournaments. The Ultimate Stats team is a group of people, all of whom create their own seeding, which is then averaged together to create a mathematical average. Once that's done, they then go back and alter anything that seems weird or that may cause a conflict. In short, it's a mathematical average, which is then fine-tuned by human hand. This was not just one person with a grudge making this seeding. Okay, now that we understand how exactly this tournament was seeded, let's get into what people are actually upset about. The big one is Spargo's bracket, but since that's the big one, we're gonna save it for last. The first issue is with Meister, the 13th seed, who is seeded into Miya right before winner's quarters. To be honest, even though I've seen a lot of people bringing this up, it's the one argument I really don't know why people are bringing up, because it doesn't seem like a real issue to me. The next problem is Glutonny, and most people are taking issue with the fact that Gluto is seeded really low, the 16th seed of the event. Not only that, Glutonny is seeded to lose to Akola and then drop into losers and eventually lose to Ashimo. And if you don't remember, Glutonny has lost the last sets against both players, with Gluto losing to Akola at Umebura SP10, and also losing the most recent set to Ashimo at Cafeteria Cup. The next issue is the big one. Spargo's bracket path. Spargo, who is the 2nd seed, is seeded to fight Yara in winner's quarters to make top 8. And if Spargo wins there, once in top 8, Spargo has to face off against Hurt in winner's semifinals. And if you don't remember by chance, Spargo has never defeated Yara or Hurt. Of course, Spargo has only fought each of them at one tournament, with Hurt double eliminating Spargo at Battle of BC6, and with Yara upsetting Spargo at Kagadi B10. The largest upset of that entire bracket that kicked off Spargo's insane losers run to first place. But for many people, this is inexcusable. As they see it, Spargo is being seeded into the only two players at the tournament who have a very likely chance to defeat Spargo. The TOs must have rigged it, because they don't want Spargo to reach Akola in winners finals. They don't want Spargo to steamroll Akola again. They want their player to win. They want to see Spargo's downfall. So they're rigging the bracket against Spargo. That is the argument of many people on Twitter right now. And while I could offer my own thoughts on this topic, I'm not a TO, nor am I particularly fond of rankings discourse, so instead I reached out to someone who was. Kenneki is a member of the Ultimate Stats team. More than that, Kenneki is one of their most important members. And Kenneki is exactly what we are looking for. Because remember when I told you that the Ultimate Stats team created this seeding? Kenneki was one of the main members involved in that process. There is literally no one better to ask. I reached out to Kenneki with a few simple questions. Firstly, I asked about everything that I talked about earlier, Meister, Gluto, and mostly Spargo. Secondly, I wanted to know what the team's thought process was when seeding overseas invaders into Japanese locals or vice versa. For the rest of this video, I'll basically be reading out the responses word for word. Firstly, Kenneki enlightened me on their process, which I already talked about earlier. So our normal process is that each seeder creates their own list, which is averaged together to create a final list. Then we get together and iron out any final inconsistencies as well as resolve conflicts. Nothing was particularly different this time around. In particular, we tried to seed invaders into Japanese players as much as we could, since it always feels a bit weird to travel somewhere and then also fight someone else who is traveling, instead of the local talent. Then I asked about Meister versus Mia, mostly because that was the question I already kind of knew what the answer was going to be. Our original draft had Hurt versus Meister and Mia versus Zachary, but since Mia versus Zachary happened at Genesis and the pre-local, we swapped the two, especially since that was Zachary's last tournament. Hurt versus Zachary has happened, but it was at Kagadibi 11, which was further back. Because Meister and Mia have never played, it's a pretty natural progression in conflict-based seeding to put them into each other, as that guarantees a projected match in winners 8's, in this case, to be one that is new. So yeah, when people brought up Meister versus Mia, one easy rebuttal was playing over and over in my head, and it's the one that Kenneki cited here. Meister and Mia have never fought before. Clearly, you can see that the seeding team's main priority was putting together players who have not fought before and creating new and interesting sets. But then if that's the case, how do you explain the Spargo thing? We'll get to that later. But first, what's the deal with Glutonny? The original averaging had Gluto at 15, which would have had him fight Spargo, so we moved Gluto down to 16 to avoid that. Okay, that makes sense. But that doesn't really answer the question of why Gluto is so low to begin with. Well, allow me to fill in the blank a little bit here. Gluto's performances so far in this spring have just not been the same level that they were previously, for a myriad of reasons like hand pains, controller issues, all the stuff that we talked about in the KR Banger 4 video. If I had to guess, I'd cite the Battle of BC6 performance to justify Gluto's low seed. While everyone else seated above Glutonny is in the middle of a dramatic rise, Gluto's in the middle of a slump. Specifically, players like Snow or Raru are having very dramatic rises, which I think justifies them being seated above Glutonny. Again, this is not saying that Glutonny is the worst player or even that Gluto is going to underperform at this tournament. There's a chance that Glutonny will come back to peak form, but at this point, Glutonny has to prove it. That's all. And so we've just got the big one left. What's up with Spargo? Kenneki said earlier that the team was trying to avoid repeat matchups, so why give Spargo two players that had previously beaten Spargo before? Spargo versus Yara was deemed to be the best option in winners quarters. Swapping Yara down would result in Spargo Ken, which happened at Genesis, and swapping Yara up would result in Hurt Yara, a matchup that happens fairly often compared to the alternative in Hurt Shuton. Swapping any further than that would likely go outside a reasonably ordered seeding. The fact of the matter is that Kagadibi 10 was a pretty decent chunk of time ago. Why was Spargo seeded into Yara? The answer is simple. Any other option would have just been a repeat from a more recent tournament like Genesis X, or would have had two Japanese players fighting each other instead of a local versus an invader, which is the priority. So cool, that explains Spargo versus Yara, but what about Spargo versus Hurt? That set just happened at Battle of BC6, the most recent big NA tournament. Surely there's no excuse for this one, right? Why not just flip things around so that Spargo fights Mia in semis instead of Hurt? This solution of swapping Mia and Hurt in the seeding is fairly common to see, with some people even arguing that having Hurt seated above Mia didn't make sense in the first place. Well, let's hear what Kenneki has to say. The ordering of the top 4, specifically Hurt versus Mia, was fairly close. More members of our team placed Hurt above Mia. At top 4, we stopped thinking about conflicts, since it's projected that a majority of these players will end up fighting in bracket regardless. And as players in contention for top 5, I think it's reasonable that you should be prepared to go against any of the competition for the top spot at whatever tournament you enter. Japanese seeding, which is largely algorithmic, tends to favor Mia in many cases due to his tournament volume, especially compared to a player like Hurt who doesn't live in one of the 2 major Japanese smash hubs, Kanto and Kansai. But more people on the team seem to favor Hurt's decisive performance at Battle of BC and victories over Spargo over Mia's slightly stronger consistency. I can't speak for the team as a whole since it's made up of several individuals with differing philosophies, but that's just how it turned out. Kagaribi is also this weekend, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the top 4 seeds again be some ordering of Akola, Hurt, Mia, Spargo. So it's possible that they seed Akola Hurt and Mia Spargo sets in winner semis instead, allowing for a bit of set variety. And so, there you have it. Every time I make a video predicting how seeding will go, I say that the ordering of the top 4 doesn't really matter, and Kenneki has repeated this sentiment here. Once you get into top 4, everyone's gonna fight each other anyways, so conflicts stop mattering. Even if Spargo and Hurt didn't get to fight in winner semis, they're still seeded to fight in losers finals. Everyone fights everyone. That's kind of just how top 4 of majors tend to play out. What's also interesting is that we see the only instance I've been made aware of where the Japanese TOs and NA seeding team disagreed, with Japan wanting to seed Mia higher and NA wanting Hurt to be higher. So again, if you were thinking that Japan was the one trying to sabotage Spargo, you're wrong, because they're the ones who actually wanted Spargo to fight Mia, and it's North America that wants Hurt to be there instead. However, I think the most compelling thing to point out is Kenneki's statement at the end. Delta 8 isn't the only major tournament going down this weekend. It's not even the only Japanese major going down this weekend, because Kagaribi 12 is also happening. And even though the seeding for that tournament wasn't out when I was talking to Kenneki, it's out now. And lo and behold, seeded for winner semifinals of Kagaribi 12 is Spargo versus Mia. Hurt is actually seeded to lose to Zamba in winners quarters, which, I mean, could certainly go the other way, but even if it does, the 2 of them won't fight until winners finals, assuming they both make it there. In order to avoid Delta and Kagaribi having these same sets for top 8, Spargo and Hurt are fighting now at Delta, and they're on opposite sides of the bracket at Kagaribi. So that's why Spargo's bracket path is the way it is. Spargo is fighting Yara because, of the available options, it's the one that hasn't happened the most recently, and Spargo is fighting Hurt in order to avoid conflicts with Kagaribi's seeding. It's not rigged against Spargo, it's just how it played out. To close off this video, I want to reiterate one point that Kenneki made. It's top 4, everyone fights everyone at some point, and when you're a contender for top 5 in the world, you better be expected to play those other contenders. And some of the people complaining about this makes me a bit confused. Did you just want Spargo to never fight Hurt again because you're afraid Spargo will lose? Do you just want Spargo to dodge Hurt for the rest of Ultimate? Spargo is a top player. You know what? No, forget that. Spargo is the top player. Do you think Spargo hasn't been practicing for this bracket? Do you think Spargo won't be prepared? That VODs weren't being reviewed? That Alandis or Apollo Kage wasn't being consulted about how to play the matchup better? That Spargo won't be adapting? Some of the over 400 quote tweets to this seeding while they're trying to defend Spargo are actually coming off as extremely rude instead, because they're assuming that Spargo is just gonna lay down and lose. It is quite literally Spargo's job to overcome adversity. The rematch against Yara and Hurt was bound to happen eventually, and if any player can't adapt and eventually overcome their opponent, then that opponent earned the win fair and square. And don't take any of this from me. This whole time we've been talking about Spargo, Spargo, Spargo. But do you know what Spargo actually said about all of this? One of those 400 quote tweets belonged to Spargo, and this is what it reads. Hard path, but I feel confident. I'm ready. Dear viewers, have some faith in Spargo, won't you? That's going to be it for today's video. Before I go, shout out to my patrons Seth Laster, Fosco223, Logan S, Parsipam, Wawa, Mr. Sinister, Happy Feet, Ocean Man, Mistybot, and my two patrons Ilta, Diamond Blaze, and Ben L. Additionally, shout out my YouTube members Dicho Jr., Defective, Boston R, Goddess B, Kirby Fan, Nexus, Loco Soco, and my two members Mike G, Wu Tang Forever, and Stormtrooper. Also, shout out my gifted tier 2 members. What are usernames? Lucky Jericho, Kuraruko, LWW74, and Enchanted IBE. Lastly, extra special thanks to my tier 3 supporters, Fat Blizzard, who says dogs are better than cats, Avidoon, who says Mr. Rice is the go to Smash content, and Iltis, who says Shattuck is top 3. If you want to support me using any of these methods, links are in the description down below. Don't forget to use my coupon code RISTER in order to get 10% off of any order from Into the AM. And lastly, I want to give one last sincere thanks to Let Me Fly for their continued support of my channel. Link to their Twitter page is also in the description. Don't miss tomorrow's upload, but until then, I've been Mr. Mice, and thank you all so very much for watching.